Okay, we should be set.
Okay, great. Thank you. Looks like we're recording. We're live. Okay, I'll call this meeting to order at 3:04 p.m. on Monday, May 10th. And I'll start with the written determination, which I will update as we go. Written determination of the chair of the public body pursuant to House Bill 5002 and Utah Code annotated UCA 52-4-207 4A and B. Whereas pursuant to Moab Municipal Code 2.08.015A, I am the presiding officer chair at all meetings of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board. Whereas Utah Code annotated 52.4.101, the Open and Public Meetings Act governs the conduct of meetings of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board. Whereas the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act amendments provide that a public body may convene and conduct an electronic meeting without an anchor location if the chair of the public body, A, makes a written determination that conducting the meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. B, states in the written determination described in subsection 4A the facts upon which the determination is based. Whereas in the previous written determinations that I made from August through December 2020 and January through April 2021, I stated the facts regarding COVID-19 and transmission, and I incorporate those prior written determinations here. Whereas the state of Utah remains under a public health emergency, does it? Grand County is in a moderate level of transmission, and the city of Moab board meetings do require attendance by individuals at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19. And as of February 19th, 2021, the CDC still indicates that the lowest risk for meetings is virtual only. Whereas the health and safety of board members, city officials, and employees and staff and members of the public is best served by holding electronic meetings of the board. Whereas the board has prepared for and demonstrated the ability to effectively conduct its public meetings electronically, including providing members of the public means to observe the board's meetings and provide comments electronically. Now, therefore, I conclude that conducting Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board meetings with an anchor location that is physically accessible for members of the public to attend in person presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination will expire 30 days after the day upon which I made the determination. It is possible that circumstances could warrant future determinations, so I may reissue future written determinations at that time. Signed, Jeremy Lynch. Attested to by Summer Johnson. Okay, approval of minutes. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes? Any comments?
I asked for a couple of changes. They were minor and they weren't significant in terms of the overall meaning, so to speak. Do you guys get those?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get any minutes, any paperwork at all.
I believe they were posted online. I can't remember now if we received them by email, but am I right about that?
From my perspective, I don't recall getting it by email, but we were given a link to the packet, Steve, and in the packet, the minutes are in that packet as opposed to just on the agenda on the city site.
Except that when I tried to access that packet, it was a broken link for me anyway. So I couldn't see anything to prep for this meeting.
I got it.
Was I there? Do you have me listed as being present? Hello?
I don't have the minutes in front of me, so I'll have to look.
Yeah, he was.
I have the minutes in front of me. You have them too, Chuck?
Yeah, April 14th, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Kyle was listed as being there.
Sure enough.
Very good.
You were there. I
propose, if you don't mind, Jeremy, since
Yep.
the other board members haven't had an opportunity to look at the minutes, that we review the minutes at the next meeting.
Sure, that's fine. We'll double up for the next time around.
Do you need a motion to do that, or can we just say we're going to do that?
I don't know. I don't think we need a motion. We can just, oh, go ahead. Somebody say something?
Motion to table.
We'll just table them. We'll table those minutes until the June meeting. Motion to table.
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. Okay. Motion passes. We'll table the minutes until June. Board and staff reports. Anyone have anything for today?
Does anybody need me to send the, I can forward you another link to the packet as an attachment. So right now, if you'd like, Kara, anybody else? Steve?
Please.
Okay. I'll just forward that to you guys right now.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Did you have something?
Yeah, Jeremy, I just would report that we received our bids for the well number 12. And fortunately, the low bid was under the engineer's estimate. We're reviewing right now to make sure that the package is complete. Otherwise, I would tell you the results, but tentatively, it's going to be on council agenda for May 26th. But so it's moving forward, I guess, is the bottom line report. So I just thought I'd share that with the
Great.
board.
I'm going to ask if everyone watched the city council meeting on Zoom.
I did not see it myself, no.
Which
Because-
one?
That Mark was at.
Oh, I didn't know he was attending one.
Is that the county commissioner meeting?
That was a city council meeting. Oh, was that the county council meeting?
I watched it.
Okay. It's very good.
Okay. Anyone else have anything before we get going?
Just that there'll be a MOP meeting that I don't think has really much on the conservation aspect to it in our agenda this time. There is a Utah Water Conservation Forum Spring Conference on Thursday, May 5th, 13th from 10 to 12. It's free and you don't have to do anything, blah, blah, blah. And it's it's the state's propaganda, of course. If anybody would like me to forward a link to the meeting, I'll be glad to do that to you. You can send me an email if you'd like, or just let me know. And if I remember something else, I'll get back to you guys later.
Great, thanks for that. Would you mind sending that my way or just sending that around to the group, Arnie?
I can send it to the entire group and you guys can choose what to do with it.
Thanks, Arnie. Okay. Anyone else for now? Okay. All right. Well, Water Conservation Plan update, review outline. We have a couple documents here. Draft and of course the 2016 version.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can see that Water Conservation Plan checklist at the front. That is everything that they have required us to include in our Water Conservation Plan. So of course we can add if we'd like to, but these are the required elements. I'm not sure exactly how different, if at all, they are from the 2016 plan, but I'll compare those soon. I mostly went through this and Kara's document for this meeting. The update here is that they would really like a full draft by July 15th.
Are you sharing your screen?
No, this is in the packet, but I can if you'd like. Sometimes it can be so small, but I'm happy to share my screen if everybody doesn't have it in front of them.
Sure, why don't we do that?
Okay.
So you just said that a draft is now due in like
July.
2 months?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. That was fun news when I got in touch with the state. They have increased moved up their timeline for drafts because they, I think, decided that it was a better way to get complete plans, is what they said. So that's fun.
Remember, it's It's not a mandate, it's just a goal.
Yes, it's a request.
It's a request. They'll live with whatever we do.
So yeah, so I guess, we'll shoot for that, see if we can do it, but this is what we've got to start with. I color coded some of these things with what the department that I think would be responsible. Most of the beginning sections are, city water use and system facts. And then I think, as we had talked about, the water board would come in under our water conservation practices section. So if we want to go through this, I don't know, Jeremy, what do you think the most efficient way to do it is? If nobody has any questions about this, then we can move on to the actual outline. And whatever you think would be best to work on first, Jeremy, is fine.
Sure. So we're looking at, I'm sorry, I'm colorblind, but I think most of what's in front of me right now is purple, which would be water board.
Yes.
And so we're, at this point, do we have anything viable? Do we have anything usable that's come out of the board at this point? Or are we looking at covering all of these sections and just kind of assigning them off again now? Or do we have anything at this point?
Yeah, so, and I'm sorry about that. I actually really tried to make this colorblind friendly and I got stuck with the blue and the purple. I'll do a better job next time. So we do have some usable things. I think we definitely have some good ideas. It looked like we had a few paragraphs from Arnie regarding the gray water rule. And then I think there were a couple other I think that you had written some introductory paragraphs that are in here as well about the importance of conservation. And then I think most of the rest of this is going to need to be either compared with the last plan or updated for this plan.
Okay. Okay, good to know. Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading through that right now.
That's okay. Yeah, they were pretty specific in the things that they were asking for. And Chuck, I think we're meeting this week. I don't know, are you still there? Yeah, about engineering's part in this.
Yeah, I think it's on Thursday we're going to meet.
Great.
I like the list. This is helpful. And from looking at what's assigned us, it's all doable. So.
Okay, great.
Okay, does anyone have any comments here? Or do we want to move into looking at what we have in front of us today? Okay.
All right, so I'll just scroll down then into the actual outline.
Sure, please.
All right, so this is the introduction. I think this is from the 2016 plan, so I haven't really worked on it at all. I think if anybody feels particularly inspired, I would welcome some help, but I'm happy to just adjust this as needed otherwise. So we'll go down. Most of these are the, facts and figures about our system. I think I know that some of you didn't get a chance to see this ahead of time. I think if you'd like to, I'm happy to make it a Google Doc and we could share it. Otherwise, if you have any specific suggestions on these parts, these, kind of facts and figures, just let me know. Otherwise, I think we'll kind of go with the structure that the state outlined and that we had in 2016. So just let me know if there's anything that sticks out to you.
So the structure that was laid out in 2016 matches what the state is asking for now, is that?
Roughly, it's okay. Fairly similar. I think they had a checklist then too, and it was pretty similar.
Okay.
So it's a little bit differently organized, but that most of the sections are the same.
Okay.
This is just the required map, and we can change that if need be. Water distribution system. I believe that the emergency action plan was one of the things that they recommended be part of this, but we can certainly include that. I think I put it also in another section as the drought management plan that the board's been talking about.
Okay.
Water treatment system was actually not one of the requirements, but I saw that we had it in the original outline from Cara, so I've included that here. And I think that it is a good section probably for us to discuss the potential for reuse as well. That's all pretty basic aquifer water rights. Water quality had a note that this was a section that Arnie wanted to be a part of. Did you have any specific thoughts about that, Arnie?
You're muted.
Thank you, Cara. And I think it's more environmental concerns and water quality. I can't remember specifically what I was at the time, and it probably reverts back to what was something in the 2016 document that we reviewed heavily at one point in time. I have to look at that document again. Who is responsible for that right now? Is that engineering, or is that public works, or so on and so forth? I thought the geology and the climate change projections and threats to water quality, the geology was already done, and threats to water quality really haven't changed. Climate change has changed. There is some issues there that I'm fairly familiar with because we did a VCAPS, and I can help with that if you want me to, or they could just take the information that Mike Duncan and the rest of us got from our workshop on that. But if you want help with water quality, I'm more than willing to do it.
Okay, I was only asking because this also is not a required section from the state. So this would be one that if it's important to the water board, and to the city, we could leave it in there.
Chuck, how do you feel about that being in there?
I think addressing it at the high level is not a bad idea. I mean, environmental concerns, I think we could talk about pretty quickly: drought and fire and that. And geology, there's enough USGS work where we've got the 13 geological hazards. I mean, that's all I would see for this, even though that's not exactly water quality. You might have some ideas for that. But I think if we do it, Arnie, we ought to keep it at high level and not get bogged down just because there's so much other stuff to do.
I think you're right. And I like your idea with the geology. We can just reference the geology has been well expanded. We could reference a couple of documents, including threats to water quality, that we do have a groundwater, come on, Chuck, where's the word I'm looking for? Groundwater protection zones already out there. Source protection, yeah, source protection zones. But not only we have the groundwater classifications. The classification was what I was looking for, and we can just reference those documents that we have them. We've done that homework already. This, well, the city has, anyways, in the county, and yeah, we can do it at a 50,000 foot level and try to keep it to 8.5 by 11.
Yeah, I think that'd have some value, but not let us get bogged down in it.
Would you like me to write that?
If you want to, or you can send me the resources that you're talking about, and I can put something together.
Okay, I've written some of the stuff, similar to this stuff, for the MOP and the watershed management plans too. So I would probably, to make my life easy, I'd probably just go to the right watershed management plan and pull some out of that. So
Perfect.
why don't I just go ahead and I'll send you an 8.5 by 11 with these 4 subtitles in it. Okay.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
You guys can do whatever you want with it. I won't be attached.
Okay. Okay. So then I know that the aquifer water measurement section can certainly be as long as we want it to be. So I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts as far as how we want to discuss that in the shortest and most useful way possible for this plan. Kind of not for anything else.
I think since we don't own the water, Division of Water Rights does own the water. I think we just use them as a reference, pull their numbers out and use them as reference them as the source.
I think there's also some value to just, I mean, I know we all know this, but thinking about various audiences for this over time, making sure it's pretty clear that, you know, this is a complicated system. So there's a high level of ambiguity in there. And that's an important background thing to know. I don't think we need to go into that at length, but I just think it, you know, someone coming from out of area or reviewing this from somewhere else might not understand that it's not a very straightforward situation.
I was thinking maybe we ought to reach out to Mark Stilson and ask him to tell us what he's thinking at this point in time. Any comment on that, Chuck or Levi? Any other ideas?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Mark and Mike have had a couple of emails that I've been copied on the last couple of weeks and talking about safe yield. What I was thinking was, I agree with both you and Cara, is let's recognize it's complex. And I think that between the USGS report and UDWR, and maybe a little bit of Ken's work, just because he's got some nice description of the complexity of the model, we could write something up here and just put it in there. And it's not the definitive work by any means, but it again references the work that's out there and being done in this complex system. That'd be my thoughts on it.
I guess my next question would be, who wants to write it?
Oh, I'd take that one on unless you had somebody else who wanted to. I'm sorry.
No, I don't want to. I just thought, I guess I'm a little confused because I thought last time we talked about this, it was that we were all going to have discussions, but Mila is really the one who's going to make sure this all fits.
Yeah, we'll work as staff to make sure that everything gets together. So Chuck and engineering is an integral part of the plan.
I don't want to write it.
No. Yeah, I just wanted to know what direction the board kind of thought we should go on that. So that was very helpful. Thank you. And I certainly agree about the ambiguity. Then this next one, methods and practices, is a requirement. That's just listing mostly. Leak detection and repair. Go ahead.
So system water loss, the way the Division of Water Rights on their website has it, anything doesn't get paid for is considered a loss. So if I'm Levi and Chuck, if I'm looking at what you guys submit, everything that we let go in the wintertime from the springs is considered a quote leak or loss. And that is not the case. It's not being leaked at all. It's just we're not using it. There are some opportunities for us to make better use of that water. But in this area on system water loss, I personally think that the saying we're losing 10 to 20% in leaks is not correct. And it gives the impression that we could save 20% of our water if we fixed our leaks, which is not the case. And I just think that should be made clear. And if you want to put something in there about we're working to make better use of that water from the springs in the wintertime, we have a couple different ways we're thinking about doing it. That I think that'd be appropriate at this point in time. Levi and Chuck, do you guys know what I'm talking about on the WRI site?
I do.
UDWR site.
Yeah, I do, Arnie, and you're exactly right. That's the way they interpret it. And maybe the way to go on this section is to say UDWR categorizes system water loss this way, give them the number, and then however this, and then maybe we just say that however this includes stream overflow, et cetera, things like you've talked about. And, you know, this isn't the comprehensive number that it might seem to be. I think that's, you're right on with this one, the way you described it.
Yeah, I think the biggest reason why it's determined that way is the way it is now is because it's after meter, but pre-distribution. So.
Okay, we'll add that in there.
Yeah, when we have a broken pipe, that's considered water loss, and that's just a reality of it all. Right.
And yeah, some years you have more broken pipes than other, but the big one, it seems like maybe 10% of what the losses are spring overflow in the winter.
Yeah.
So
It could be, yeah.
Okay. Water use, this section was largely about rates and then our volumes and deliveries. So we'll be working with staff to get those numbers. And then they do have some required categories. I think that there was some discussion about this. It's they're asking for residential versus commercial versus institutional and industrial. And I think we were talking about possibly being able to add in like hotel or tourism as a category separately. And we don't necessarily have to do that for this plan, but I know that some people would be very interested in those numbers anyway. So we can try and break that out from the residential and commercial numbers.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
It says chart current per capita water use in gallons per capita a day by type and use. I'm not sure that makes sense to me.
That's what that was all just lifted straight from their site. I think they're talking about this here, so potable and non-potable, and then these are the types.
Yeah, but how can we do commercial and gross per capita? Oh, they want to know, I guess, I don't know how they want you to, I'm sure they've given you explicit formula on how to calculate that number. Gross per capita day for commercial doesn't quite make sense to me. But I'm sure I'm taking a step back. I'm assuming that they've given you a very straightforward equation to calculate that.
Yeah, they have some resources on the website, and the guy that we're working with is helping out as well.
Chuck, you know what I'm saying? That gross per capita day for commercial doesn't really sound like a metric that makes any sense to me.
Well, it doesn't seem like it's an easy one to calculate. Some of the other stuff is kind of buried in our water reports that we do annually, and we could come up with that one, but I think that one is a difficult one. So they probably have some factor somewhere where they're going to have us put it in there. Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Then our water use and projections. So, you know, we're going to be working very closely with Chuck on this. See what we can come up with. And then I know that, again, this is another place where the impacts of the visitor population on the use and projections is something we could add in if we wanted to try to calculate that. But they are asking for a graph of reliable supply through 2060. That's the number that they've chosen. So.
Yeah, the 2060 is basically the 40-year water plan that, you know, they're looking at there. So we actually have a lot of information on that. You know, some of it's, you know, open to discussion, but at least it's what we can put in there as of now, right?
All right. Good luck with that, Chuck.
I'll take it, all right.
This next table here, does that come from me? I believe it did.
Potentially.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, that would have been from the document that Cara put together, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to have a discussion on that and the table down below right now. If you want to go from that table down below, if we're going to do that.
Which one?
There's a couple more tables down below.
Oh, here. Yeah.
So, and Levi, you're here, aren't you?
That's a
Levi,
yes.
yeah, and Chuck.
Yeah, I'm
So
here.
when I looked at the numbers that on your WRI, on the UDWRI website that were out there, they are very variable. Can I put it that way? Every year can be very different. And I'm pretty sure it depends upon how much water we actually receive in rain and monsoons. But that really doesn't matter why they're variable. It's just that they are very variable. And it just so happens that in 2000, and I believe it's 2015, we used more water. I can't remember whether it was more water or whatever that allowed us to look like we were doing really good by 2019. And our percent change from 2000, if you just use those years, puts us at already beyond the 25% that they were asking for by 2025. We already made our goals for the state as far as they're concerned, and we're also under their goal of 267 gallons per day per capita for the southeastern area. I thought that those numbers were a little misleading because it was just those years that seemed to make those metrics look really good. So if you go down to table 2 down below there, Mila, move down a little farther. I took a 5-year average around 20,000 in 2015, with the exception of 1999, which had what I considered a number that didn't seem reasonable to put into this. And that shows us at 2015 having 17.1%. And I don't have one for 2020 there, but I liked I thought it gave us a better impression of actually how much water we're using as opposed to using just those single years. I don't have the graph and the data in front of me at this point in time to show you that, but this is something that I think the city needs to decide how you want to calculate this. And if you just go on the 2000 and 2015 per capita day, I think the statistics are a little misleading. You guys can do whatever you want, but it looks really good right now if you use 2000 and 2015, but the years around that do not look the same. Okay, can I put it that way? Chuck, do you understand what I'm saying? And Levi?
Oh yeah, Arnie, we look at the data, and we've looked at the data historically, and it does fluctuate. And I think it's a combination of reporting, billing, and wet years and dry years, like you say. And the 5-year average is not a bad way. I mean, we use it sometimes, right, in other methods, as you know, to kind of normalize data. And I think I get what you did here, and it looks good to me. Want to think about a little bit more. And the one thing I don't know, and I don't know if anyone here knows, and maybe I'm the only one who doesn't know, but on the 2030 conservation goal, is it gallons per capita day that they're looking for the reduction in? Is that the magic metric that we're looking for? The state's looking for?
Yes, and it's 267.
Okay.
Hey, one gentleman, first of all, I apologize for being late. I spaced it out. In the table, which is great, I would suggest that if water use per capita, the metric, as Chuck says, has declined, put a minus sign out there in the right-hand column. I mean, when I first looked at the table, I thought our water consumption was going up. So, I mean, that's just my way of looking at it. And a second suggestion is to cover the variability kind of thing. If you've got some historical data, just plot it out in an XY graph type fashion, and then run a regression through it at the existing per capita rate, for example, and then run another line through it, what it would look like if we did achieve the goals of the conservation, the 20% reduction, whatever it is, and see if and that way it'll be pretty obvious without having to do a block average or running average mean back through the last number of years, which will tend to make us look worse that way. I mean, the regression will make it more visible by eye, in my opinion.
You know, Chucky has a good idea there. When I put this together, I just threw it out there and I was looking at these numbers and well, go use the 5-year average and see how that works for you. But he's got a pretty good idea in using a line to go through it all. You guys can do whatever you want. I'm not attached to this. I just do know that the numbers are variable. And if you go strictly by their dates, it doesn't give me a real picture of what's going on.
Yeah, when we report it, as you know, when we report it to DWR, they wanted it in this kind of tabular form, you know, and it's built on that kind of stuff. So I think, Mike, your suggestion of something that's meaningful and is visual, I think we can work on that and pull that together, time allowing. But I think it's a good idea, and I think we can do that.
Okie
It
dokie.
would be.
I like your suggestion on the minus signs. So.
And I think this was yours, maybe Arnie, writing about that potential alternative metrics.
Yes, that was me writing. I was just giving some verbiage out there so people understood what I did there. And like I said, I'm not attached to this. I looked at it and I thought I'll calculate it out and see where we're at. I do want you all to know that we are well ahead at this point in time of our goals, that every goal that they've ever put out there for us. We've reduced our per capita use drastically, and we're ahead of the time schedule in terms, if you would want to write that regression, we're doing a good job. So.
All right, so it sounds like we'll work together to make sure that we get this into the form that everybody's okay with, that we feel like represents the real situation on the ground.
Well, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Down towards the bottom of the page, a little bit lower than you're at now. Talk about Moab, City of Moab has 10,000 acre feet of senior rights to the aquifer. Shouldn't we put in the current estimate of 3,600 total acre feet per year, which just came out in the last 2 studies?
Well, the Moab Cities has been adjudicated, and that number should not be 10,000 acre feet. Chuck, isn't that 9,100 and something at this point in time? Is that the paper water rights that the city owns?
Yeah, well, it is.
Chuck, you're muted.
Chuck.
Yeah, it's about 9,100 acre feet of water rights, Steve. So those are our paper water rights. And, you know, I think you might be mixing it up with the potential amount of wet water that's in the aquifer, that 3,600 acre feet that's being talked about. This sentence says we have water rights for, we could consume up to 9,000 acre feet of water rights per year if we had that amount of wet water. But what we consume is about 2,000 acre feet per year of wet water, leaving us a balance of about, 7,000 acre feet of paper water rights, which is a good position to be in. A lot of cities are kind of flip-flopped on that, where they don't have enough water rights.
Isn't it a little misleading to say you got 10,000 feet when in reality there isn't even 10,000 feet in the aquifer?
So I think the thing there, Steve, is in the document, we need to talk about the paper water versus the wet water. And so that's where this is going, is basically having a section that's talking about the city of Moab has the right to this water. Now, whether that water exists is a totally different question. And so that's in a previous section that talks about, it's one up here that talks about the aquifer and the capacity. So I think that's I think it's an important thing to make sure we're very clear whenever this is in the document of paper water and wet water are 2 totally different things. And sadly, the way the state views it, it's the paper water that kind of takes precedence from what I see, rightly or wrongly, until the aquifer is depleted.
So is the wet water number going to be used in your 40-year plan of how much water you're going to need and how much water you have?
Well, Steve, let me see if I can answer one take on that. I did write several paragraphs that I submitted, I don't know, a couple of months ago before Mila came on board. And I'm not sure if she's seen that, but that section is consistently about paper versus actual wet water rights and so forth, wet water availability, if you will. And it does elaborate. I think that's a great idea to make sure that our readers are clear about the distinction between the two, because for a long time they weren't. Everybody thought anything that existed on paper was real wet water, and it is anymore. But so that's, I mean, this subject is treated elsewhere, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And maybe that would suffice for the purposes of the document, or we could expand this section as well, I suppose.
This current section doesn't actually have a home. So we, if we want to put this mostly into a discussion of metrics and water, paper water rights versus wet water, we could probably put that up in water use or supply, one of the two.
I think that's a good idea to find where that home should be, because we've got, you know, the use section and also the aquifer, you know, the measurement section. So somewhere in there. And then I think perhaps it makes sense in our why conserve water section to also include that, you know, there's a big difference between paper water and wet water, especially, and a high level of ambiguity that we have to have a comfort level with in our system, because it's more complicated than a lot of systems.
And Mike, I don't think I have that from you if it wasn't in this outline. If you could send me what you had, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm curious of where it went. I know some folks on the water board saw it. Anybody know where?
Maybe in our folder. I can dig around for it too.
I'll be happy to send it to you again, but I'm trying to remember. I remember that most people were, you know, generally happy, and I think there were a few typos. It picked. So Arnie, you said you had some typos, and I haven't. I appreciate that, but I don't know if you want to send that back to me, or I'll just send the original to Mila. But then the typos get thrown away, so I don't know.
Absolutely positive I don't have that document anymore, Mike, but I'll review it again if it comes my way.
No, let me do it. Mila, I'll send it to you, okay?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I'll go through everything for typos and all of that, of course. So, you know, don't worry about that.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that maybe it sounds like this would make sense to split into a discussion of the alternative metrics when we talk about our calculations, and then take this other section about wet water versus paper water rights and put that in our water rights section. So I can certainly do that. And then it looks like we went into a bit about the conservation measures, why conserve. It looked like there was a note in here that Jeremy will review the plan and make suggestions. So Jeremy, I'm not sure if you had a chance to do that yet. And then we do have some of these other discussions just as far as what we're doing with water conservation already. So I don't know where the board wants to go with that part.
If I may, Mila, with one other question for Arnie, I guess. It's great, as you pointed out, it's great that you know, we already met our goals from the table that we looked at a moment ago in terms of water conservation. But I'm interested in why, because it's, I mean, can you point out, and it'd be worth bragging about, I suppose, in this document, if why did the water use go down, if in fact that change was statistically significant? Because if it wasn't, and it just turns out to be a statistical artifact, a 2 sigma kind of thing, then we're going to be in trouble later on if we really haven't changed our habits, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So do you know how we might have changed our habits?
Anything I would put out there would be totally hypothetical, but Chuck may have more on this than I do.
I would suggest one is we built a new wastewater treatment plant. I know I know that for many years, from talking to the operators, for me before the time I got here, the only way we could have a chance of staying within regulatory guidelines was to solution to pollution is dilution type thing. We were going through massive quantity of water at the plant, and we're using a whole lot less right now. I think that's, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but I think that's part of the reasons. That's one significant reality. We use more electricity at this plant, just to be honest, but we use much less water than we used to use at this plant.
Okay, great. Sounds good. That'll sell them. Yeah.
Well, I think there's another kernel that I'm kind of hearing there, Mike, is that, you know, have we, okay, we may have already met or exceeded or whatever these goals that have been handed down to us, but looking at our paper water versus wet water discrepancy, is that good enough? Not so much is that good enough to make sure we can continue to invite half the planet to come to Moab, but is that good enough to mean that we will continue to have enough water? Should the aquifer actually be less, or should climate change that? I mean, I think there's sort of two different things going on here. You know, there's what the state says we have to do versus what maybe we really need to think about doing. So I don't know really where that fits, but it seems like an important concept.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, forgive me, I was talking to Carly on another subject today, and I noted you guys probably saw that the Salt Lake area, from whence Carly came, has implemented, maybe at a state direction. I remember Governor Cox was involved with this in the newspaper, has directed that certain entities, public entities up in Salt Lake area, switch to nighttime watering. And I think Carly's about to suggest that sort of thing here, not to make it onerous or you know, finable or anything. Not right now. Just right now to just educate basically people and public outreach that it's coming, and I'm fine with that.
That's honestly a thing that I think we need to do more of, because just the number of people I speak with in town who are still convinced that you water everything every day and other things. I think that there's a huge potential to water much more efficiently than people do. I don't really know. I don't think you get there through legislation and citation. I think you get there through outreach and inspiration, personally.
Yeah, we're actually meeting with Lisa, the communications officer, this week to talk about starting a sort of drought awareness campaign with all that kind of information. Good.
I mean, we tried to work on that years ago when this board first started, and it never went anywhere. I'd love to see something like that get more traction.
Yeah. Okay. Do we, as far as current conservation measures, is there anything that anyone wants to flesh out there? You know, I mean, I suppose we could put the sewage treatment plant in there. Education, like we were saying, we don't have too much in place as far as policies and development, but that's okay. You know, whatever it is, if anybody wants to put anything else in there, that's something that we could do as far as concepts.
So we're talking things that are currently actively happening.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would be looking to Levi and Chuck and city staff to know more what those things are. I don't necessarily know what those things are.
For us, for sure. And then just, you know, I guess kind of in general in the community, if there's anything else that, you know, we would want to mention as a conservation measure, we could, but you know, we don't have, as far as ordinances and standards, the city will take care of that for sure.
Hello, can I speak if you don't mind? That what you were just talking about in terms of the landscape watering, we've been discussing and had several opportunities and have discussed things several times the city staff and this board has said that outdoor irrigation practices could be improved in the area. And we actually had one seminar or open house to develop some of those and get some education out there. We talked about several different things in terms of putting newsletters out there and things in the paper, and not a lot of that ever happened. But it sounds like the city staff at this point in time is putting more effort into that. And I think that is a current conservation measure that you're planning on doing right now. And that could be part of that current conservation measures section. What sort of education and outreach you're going to do. And I'd like to remind you again, like I just spoke about the last time, was that we have two new USU people that are there to help you, and they're actually paid to do that stuff. If I was the city, I'd be reaching out to them to bring them into that fold also.
Yeah, they don't start until late June, but yes, we certainly will.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And one of them is my good friend, so I'm very excited to work with her. It's going to be great. So then the new conservation measures for the next 5 years, and this will bring us into the next discussion that we have, which is the landscape and graywater ordinance ideas. I was just listing out, our planning efforts versus ordinances and policies. And then what do we have? City improvements and outreach. So we do have outreach as and so this is all the things that we want to do. So I would say this is one of the, other than the text that we've talked about already, this would be a really great place if the board wanted to get involved and give suggestions for what else you'd like to see as far as conservation measures, any particular kinds of outreach. I just listed some things that we had talked about briefly in here as well. And then some of the planning efforts that are already happening. So if there's any other suggestions, feel free to make them now or email me as well. And then this last part, and just so you know, these two kind of go together. Other considerations, and the state doesn't have this, but I know in Kara's outline, we did have, obviously the ecological concerns, which I think should certainly be in there. And then there was some discussion of including water banking as an option, at least to talk about it. And then our drought management plan. And I think we can put that here as its own section or put it up under supply. So thoughts on the future?
Mila, let me ask you about one additional topic. Maybe it's well known that what I want to say, the notion of charging more for additional quantities of water, tiered water price. We're already doing that, and that's just real fine. Would the city contemplate, and keep in mind, guys, that residents are already and businesses are already up in arms about increasing water costs for sewer and water and so forth. So there's a limit to how much we can whack them. But my question for you is, in the interest of water conservation and being a critical resource, would we consider even more aggressive tiered pricing? Not so much to raise money, mind you, but just to implement conservation of a scarce resource. I'm not suggesting that we do that. I'm just throwing it out as something that could be considered and how you guys feel about it.
Mike, are you suggesting a conservation fee as part of the rate structure as a tier?
I guess you could call it that. I don't know if we'd want to do it or not. I mean, you can imagine the opposition to it, but if water was, expensive enough, that would be one way to drive it down. The criticism of it would be that only the rich can afford water, and that's not good either. So I don't know. Just
my only thought, is I think in a way it's a good idea because that wouldn't have to be much, but it would. If you took that conservation fee and put it towards conservation programs, whatever that may be, purchasing rebate programs for cisterns or rebate programs for high efficiency devices or There's all sorts of things, and Mila knows them better than me, but that might be one way to do it, to identify that that money is indeed going somewhere, and then we show them what we're doing with it. So it's my thoughts. Yeah.
So some other towns, communities, they do a seasonal surcharge just on their upper level
We're doing that.
users, the higher users. And then they take that surcharge and put it into the conservation programs. So that might be an option. That if you're going to use a lot of water, you're going to pay a lot of money to teach people how to conserve.
That goes right along with what Chuck and Mike was just saying. I just had one question on that. And is Levi still here and Chuck still here? I thought there were a small number of users in the valley that used an extraordinary amount of water compared to everybody else. Is that the case?
Yeah, after a fashion, because I sit on the groundwater board, they assess their rates and the total volume used every month by connection, without regard particularly to how many people it's serving behind that connection. So if you've got for example, a hotel that's got a I don't know, 8-inch, you guys, Chuck, you know more than I do, a 6 or an 8-inch connection as opposed to a 4-inch connection, and they use 10,000 acre feet per month to throw out a totally wrong number, as opposed to a typical residential home that's using much less. So the lower tiered rates would apply to residences. In effect, that's what they were doing, and the groundwater board is a pretty conservative bunch of farmers and so forth, but they seem to be comfortable doing that. And I think it's been suggested that it would be more fair on a per user basis if they set up a tiered rates per person or per room, or normalize it in some sort of fashion so that you don't end up with a giant aggregate of water that gets subjected to a high rate.
So you're talking about ERUs, equivalent residential use.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is fine. Hey, but I guess what my point was, and I like that. I've always liked the ERUs better than what the state comes out with in per person per day, because per person doesn't apply to a transitional community like we have here with all of our tourists. But I guess my point was that we are a small community at this point in time. We're not necessarily Salt Lake City or some big community. And I always, although I may be stating something a little different from that right now, I always thought that the highest tier that we have right now was not high enough. But that was my personal opinion. However, the other side of that coin is that there's only going to be a handful of industries. I'm assuming that they're commercial entities that may have a very good reason for using that water. We may price them out of business. And I just am wondering, like I said, I thought there was only a handful of people that were getting into that last tier or using an exorbitant amount of water in the valley in our system. Is that, if that is the case, Chuck, would we really be putting somebody out of business by doing that?
Well, you asked a lot of questions there, Ernie, but there have a lot of thoughts. Yeah, but so what we have in the city is we have our billing data, and just within the last month, we've been looking at the top 10 users by quantity per year, and and going from memory, out of those top 10, 4 of them were motels, and then there was restaurants, and then there were other commercial users, and then there was the city. So yes, they're indeed commercial users, but it's not all motels and it's not all service stuff. And Mike probably gets more complaints about the rate structure, but the rate structure that the city adopted, we've been using since last August. I think people have been paying their bills, and our water fund is doing what it was designed to do, which is let us be able to fix what we need to fix and go get new what we need to go get new. So I don't know what the appetite is at the council level or even for users to have their rates go up again, but
Well,
I think that,
if we're just talking about tier 3, most users would not be affected. It would be those top 10 you're talking about would be affected. And,
Yeah.
and maybe that would drive those top 10 to change some of their practices or not, depending upon what's going on. Go ahead, Gar.
To have a real conversation about this, it would help me to have a sense of what those top tier users are. You know, I know our water bill has more than doubled when GWSSA changed the water rates, which I fully understand. We use a lot of water to water at the nursery. We do it as efficiently as we can, but we can't not water. If we don't water, we can't have plants. And if we don't have plants in the valley that are available, and this is fully a biased statement at the moment, but if people are then going to go outside of the valley to buy plant materials, that doesn't necessarily help in the long run, because other places that sell plants don't necessarily understand the water constraints and what plants do well here. So I think there is a fine line between, I totally agree with charging more for those who use more, but I also think there needs to be some analysis of, are they using more because they have to use it to produce whatever it is they produce, or are they using more because they're too lazy to have their irrigation turned back and to have actually healthier plant materials, for instance, because they aren't watering every day for 2 hours. I think there's two different things there that need to be looked at.
It's exactly what I was trying to say, that just raising the tier might not show the whole picture for those 10 units. And I don't know where Cara is at this point in time. I'm assuming she's not into tier 3, but maybe we need a 4th tier, Chuck. That's just an idea out there, but I think as far as, and I'm going to get back to what we were doing, maybe we ought to put in here for not other considerations, but in here in the next 5 years, take a good hard look at our water tier structure and what it would do to our city if we were to change it a little bit. That could be one of our conservation efforts in the next 5 years.
I think also this kind of speaks to the idea of, if you're looking at growth, if you're looking at bigger picture planning that might be going on, understanding what existing industry and believe me, the nursery is tiny by comparison to most operations. But, you know, are we also wanting to look at, hey, there's certain industries that maybe shouldn't locate here or can't locate here because they would use too much water. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know how you would actually regulate that, but it does seem kind of important to look at that kind of a topic.
Would there be a way to have the tiers geared solely towards outdoor residential watering versus like a hotel use or house use or a business use? Because aren't we trying to discourage unnecessary outdoor watering for lawns and things like that?
There are two sets of tiers right now. One is for commercial and one is for residential. So yeah,
right. So couldn't you change the tier levels or charges on a residential? Because if you compared their winter use versus their summer use, it would be fairly easy to see what they're watering.
So they put a big significant increase on them about a year and a half ago for residential users, and the impacts of that I don't think have been felt by everybody, and will be felt this summer when they start getting their bills, because just went into this November. Before we actually start talking about, I'd like to see what happens when people start getting these bills this summer, because I am sure other people are going to hear about it. They're going to be paying significantly more this summer than they have been in the past.
And they're going to be watering differently and more because the soil's so dry and it's been hotter and all of those things. So I think, you know, it's all very interconnected.
Yeah.
Hopefully our education campaign will land at the right time.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, not to get us bogged down, but I would just take this opportunity to say that the reason the water rates went up was because they hadn't been raised in over 10 years. And because there was over $15 million worth of needs that hadn't been addressed, and the city of Moab was the lowest water rates in the state of Utah. So there was a lot of thought and consideration and compromise that went through those. And could they be improved? I'm sure they can. But there was a reason that happened. It wasn't that it was just, oh, let's go make more money for the city. It was to address the needs to keep our system going. So I just wanted to put that out there because sometimes that'll be part of the education campaign there, Mila.
Yeah, I want to second that. The staff, Chuck was primary among them, did a great job of informing council about exactly what was going on. And it's just like he said, okay, it's just too many cans kicked down the road for a long time. That was part of it.
I like the idea, you guys, of looking at our tiered structure in the next 5 years and taking a close look at what industries and what segments of our area are using water after the new conservation fee goes into effect, and thinking long and hard about how we could use the top tier maybe on commercial to lower the top 10 users of water in the place. But can we instead not dive into the details and have that as our new conservation measure? In 5 years, we'll come up with a new tier sometime in the next 5 years. I think that's a good goal.
Or we can, I can at least include it as a bullet point here, and then we can flesh it out in the next little while, even if it just gets included as, evaluate that option for implementation. All right, so we have the facilities improvement, our outreach plan. The responsibility is just names and contact information. Is there anything else for other considerations? Are there any sections missing that anyone wants to see?
Can you go up a little bit to 6.4.1, planning efforts? Chuck? So is this where you have, this is planning for conservation as opposed to planning for increases in supply, and increases in supply are in another section, aren't they?
I believe that's true. Further
Yes.
up. Yeah.
Okay, and so we're looking at planning efforts here for groundwater. I just want to make sure that there was some sort of increase in supply. We are getting another well, and so would secondary irrigation actually be part of that planning efforts in terms of increasing supply, or is that part of conservation?
Actually, I think it fits in both.
It's in both? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me interject this, by the way. Talking to Mark Stilson, Arnie, you may have heard him say this already. It caught me by surprise, although I'm not sure I disagree with him at all. So for the last few years, he's been talking about a groundwater management plan sponsored by Division of Water Rights. And in the last some months, perhaps in part due to a new state engineer at the top, a woman, and I forgot, forgive me because I forgot her name now. But anyway, she's apparently been encouraging new groundwater management plans like ours, rather than having DWR run it or impose strict first in time, first and right sorts of considerations, to have some other organization be the sponsor and coordinator of regional groundwater conservation efforts. And it kind of sounded like to me, Arnie, that MOPS would be the perfect organization to do that, but it puts them in a position of more responsibility and more importance. I mean, I would guess, because we all pretty well know where the new water is going to have to come from. It's either going to come from surface water from Mill Creek or Pack Creek, and even Mark agrees that there's relatively little new water that can be pulled out of any of the aquifer, groundwater that can be pulled out of any of the aquifers. But so the new news in here is maybe they're changing their approach about who would actually conduct a groundwater management plan process.
And I have heard that, Mike, and my thoughts on that are still go back and forth on whether or not UDWRI should be doing that or whether somebody else. I'm personally not in favor of a regional water authority for our area. I think that takes planning for water out of the city's, takes a tool out of the city that they need, because there's more than just water issues here in terms of development. There's also transportation and so on and so forth. But in just speaking directly to that, I can see Teresa's her name. I can see Teresa wanting to do that. I personally feel that their business plan in terms of the Division of Water Rights doesn't give them enough funding to actually perform the duties that they're required to do. And that would be enforce a groundwater management plan and put one together. So I can see Teresa wanting to go that direction. I'm not sure whether I like that direction at this point in time, but we're kind of, the state owns the water and we're kind of at their mercy, so to speak, at this point in time. And we'll see where they go with this.
Okie dokie, thank you.
I think if we're up to them, they would use the Colorado River to supply Moab City water, and then take the water from these springs and take them to San Juan County. I don't think you want a regional plan.
Yeah, I don't think we want a regional authority.
I think you're right.
Okay, are we looking for any other recommendations for the remaining sections here? Is that where we're at?
Yeah, just for other considerations or anything else we want to add in here.
Okay. I don't have any myself. Does anyone else have anything they would want to see added as into the outline?
Well, I don't see anything on the outline at this point in time, but something may crop up.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so I think my plan, so we're working within the city to get the most of the upper sections done. And then I think we've already had a number of suggestions from the water board, the text that's in here for this section. I think if anybody feels particularly inspired to work on any of these later sections, I would absolutely appreciate the help. Even if you just want to send me ideas, that's great. And otherwise, I'll just get started on putting this together.
Great.
The Matheson wetlands is kind of a complicated one because, as you know, they're doing some studies down there at this point in time to see what effects a further withdrawals will have on them and whether or not we're going to bring that brine layer up and put it into the Colorado River. I don't mind writing a paragraph or two about the Matheson wetlands if you want to assign that to me.
Great. Thank you. Okay. And if anybody else, gets inspired and, you want to send me anything, then, go ahead. You don't have to sign up right now.
Well, and I was just going to say, I don't have a clear vision of what Mill Creek or Pat Creek or even Colorado River aspects might look like in there, but I'm certainly interested. So as you're drafting that stuff, I won't say I'll draft it, but I would gladly have conversations about opportunities and whatnot as we move forward, especially with ways that maybe we could, we treat the creeks less like storm drains and more like ecological systems.
Yay.
I would really like to see that in there too. Definitely. Okay. Does that sound good, Jeremy? Or would you like to discuss anything else about the outline?
Nothing else about the outline right now on my end. We could move on to the documents that we have that are pertinent to that outline, if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay. So our next agenda item is to discuss draft conservation policies and review the few that were sent our way. So Arnie, you had the gray water reuse one page here. So we'll look at that one first. And then Mila had a landscape ordinance discussion included in here. I'm just going to scroll down to find Arnie's myself. Does everyone have access to that now, or would we be able to share screen again and look at it that way?
I was able to pull it up, so I've got it.
Okay.
I have a comment if you're taking comments.
Yeah, please. That's what we're doing now.
So the last paragraph on commercial developments. I would think we need something in there that defines a business that would generate enough gray water to recover versus a business that wouldn't generate sufficient gray water to justify the expenses. For instance, Jiffy Lube or mechanic shop like that with a single bathroom, no showers, limited
So-
sinks.
So if they don't have any gray water, they don't have any gray water to actually do anything with. So you're right. Jiffy Lube only has a bathroom. They may have a wash sink, but I'm sure that Orion would go tell you that that wash sink that's coming off of the guy's hands probably shouldn't be in the gray water section. So Jiffy Lube wouldn't have anything that would qualify to actually be hooked up to gray water. And I agree with you. I agree with you that there's got to be give and take in all of that. I kind of felt that the city was looking at with commercial doing some sort of combination where any new development would have enough reusable water either through stormwater or through gray water to take care of their landscaping. And that was the goal, not necessarily that every commercial have gray water, but that they somehow had enough water without using municipal water to do their vegetation. And they could also control that by not having a landscape that used a lot of water. So there were 3 different ways to do that. Now, I'm not attached to this section at all. And I hear what he's saying. I tried to put something in there for that, but you guys can do anything, whatever you want with that as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know how what the city feels like about how to handle it or how the other water boards want to handle the fact that there are several ways to conserve or to not use municipal drinking water to use on a landscape on commercial properties. But go for it, you guys.
I'd just like to see something that's clearly states that 2 cases. One is a business that does not plan any outdoor watering at all. You know, they're basically a building and a parking lot, is not required to even address this. And then the types of businesses that wouldn't generate enough gray water to be worth capturing. I think that should just be clear. I'm done.
I agree. And I think it's important to note that at least I haven't read the planning code in a long time, or various codes and requirements, but any new business is required to have certain things like certain amount of parking, certain kinds of landscaping, whether they're going to have trees or not, things like that. So I think that the gray water ordinance is not very functional unless it is tied pretty tightly to the landscape ordinance. Because if you have no landscape, where are you going to put it? But also you have to have a certain kind of landscape. But anyway, I think that they need to be kind of together. They can't really stand separately, in my opinion.
I thought I said that in there. Did I not?
I don't remember, but I'm just trying to answer what Steve's bringing up is all.
Yeah, and his point's well taken.
Yes. Yeah, I think, and because I think, yeah, you can't, neither of these can stand alone is sort of the way I look at it.
Any other particular comments on what Arnie has written here? Any direction we'd like to go with it?
Mila, do you mind sharing that section so we could take a quick look at it?
Yo, you're on mute.
The one that you sent over that we're looking at right now?
Yeah, I'm not seeing it on my screen. Do you mind sharing that at this point in time?
I think we've talked, Arnie, about we all would be looking at it on our own, but I like.
Oh, is that somehow I missed that at some point in time?
That's okay. Just this one.
The rest of it looks good to me.
Yeah, I got it down here. Or rainwater catchment system, or rainwater catchment system that would provide all water required for the landscaping associated with its new development. That's, I thought
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
The issue though is honestly, you can't grow a tree with the rainwater you catch here. You can't do it. We
Yeah.
6 to 10 inches of rain a year unless you have, and I don't have the math in front of me, but you know, if you really want a healthy tree, depending on what, you know, if you're downtown where the water table is only maybe 8 feet deep, as is evidenced by the water that constantly has to be pumped out of the basement of the Zions Bank building, for instance, that's one thing. But if you are, you know, on the, up by CFI, well, they might have a spring by them, but you're at a place like the nursery where we're perched on this weird, nasty soil, we would never have enough runoff to actually irrigate much of anything. So what's concerning me on this is that you then are basically saying you must do xeriscaping, which doesn't bother me any, but we're going to get pushback on that. And so I think just being extremely clear that that's potentially what this means, and using native plants and things like that. Otherwise, that unintended consequence could smack us pretty hard.
I agree with you completely. And I was somehow trying to write in here that we would ask people to do the best they can. And I apparently don't have that quite in there.
Well, it's a tough topic. And I think the landscape, that's why it needs to go with the landscaping ordinance.
With the landscaping.
And then I think it's also a matter of making sure it goes with enough actual good information, education and outreach that helps people understand what that really means. And that you can, in fact, have a landscape that looks quite nice and isn't just cactus and gravel. That works in our climate. But that's a tough sell and is going to require some work, I think.
You could probably just change the word require to encourage in the commercial section, and that would combined with some tiered water rates would be pretty good encouragement if a business does generate sufficient gray water, and if they're going to do some landscaping that they need to water.
Where I got some of this from, this thought process was the city's commercial planning, the new ordinances that they're suggesting for the commercial zone or the hotel zone, whatever you want to call it, where they are considering requiring them to either have gray water or rainwater catchment that would provide all the water. That's where I kind of pulled that from, because the city had talked about that. I'm happy to see this completely changed. I'm not attached to it at all. And you guys have all brought up good points. I'm just wondering who's going to work those into this document.
Mila's job.
Mila's,
Yeah.
Can you do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, take it and run.
And I will just add that I have spoken with the planning department and with Orion about this and about the landscape ordinance, and they are, I know the planning department at least is supportive of a xeriscaping requirement for new construction. They didn't feel like that would be too difficult to enforce. They get people asking about that all the time. And Orion said that I believe the only thing he mentioned was that I think it was something about second stories being hard to get gray water from. So we may just want to make sure that we have some of those details in place. We don't have a lot of second stories, but.
The devil is in the details when it comes to this, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And Orion's point, and other people have made the point, when you get to 2 or 3 stories, running gray water from them can be more difficult, but it can be done. So, yeah. Anyways.
But I think this is vague enough for right now that it's, I think it would let all of that happen in the future when we actually pass an ordinance.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I'll make some of those changes and send it back out as part of the draft, and
Great.
we'll take a look from there.
Great. Well, if there are no further comments on gray water reuse right now, that's where we'll leave it and move on to the landscape ordinance document that Mila put together. In the packet, it's just below.
And I can share this again unless you want to have conversation where we can see each other better. Preferences.
Arnie, you're on mute.
Still on mute.
I know I'm on mute. That's what I'm talking to myself. So I don't have two screens like the rest of you, but I can see most of your faces now, and go down here and read this so you don't have to share your screen.
Okay. So these are, you know, a lot more details than we'd really need to put into the water conservation plan, but I know that we're talking about actually also developing an actual landscape ordinance. So I thought it wouldn't be useless to discuss some of these details. I think that the main thing that I have learned recently in talking to the USU Extension people up north is that they are actually getting ready to change their ideas about particularly day of the week watering. I guess they've actually done some recent research, and it turns out that it encourages a scarcity mindset more than it actually does any good conservation. So essentially you end up with people that overwater on their day because they only have this one day, and oh my gosh, you know, they have to water everything forever. I don't know that that's not something that at least USU is recommending anymore for these types of landscape. And, you know, this is more directed towards turfgrass, but landscape watering. And they also said that they're finding out that the biggest environmental factor is actually not midday time hot temperatures, but wind. And so, you know, of course, we want to, you know, I think encouraging watering at night is something that we all kind of have on the brain as the main effect. But, you know, if it's windy at night, you're actually, you know, potentially losing just as much water as you are in the middle of a still day.
Well, and I think it's also harder when people already don't pay attention to their irrigation as they maybe should, and they miss leaks and other things if everything runs in the middle of the night. Whereas if you actually have a chance of noticing that, oh, the sprinkler heads aren't popping up, and oh wow, look, there's this giant sinkhole over here that you know you may or may not notice otherwise. So I think I've always really not been a giant fan of the nighttime for a variety of reasons, and except for, as Levi spoke about at some other meetings, the fact that some nighttime watering can help with overall distribution pressures because supply is used more during the day. So having, you know, so I think it's just the rationale of why you're doing it that I think is more important than being really rigid on what it is, which way it goes.
Yeah, and just in terms of some of the other kind of facts that are on here to think about is, you know, I think similar to what Kara is saying about being able to actually see what's happening, you know, I think one of the best ways to make sure that you're watering efficiently is to make sure that there's no puddles and that nothing is running off. So, you know, if there was some way to work that in there, that people were actually aware of how much water is going into their landscape versus, you know, what they're losing to the street or just, you know, puddling and then evaporating, then, you know, I think that's really an area that we could see a lot more efficiency.
And this, I don't know if this fits in here, but just something that's been coming up a lot lately is talking with people and mentioning the idea of actually having a moisture meter available. You know, it's one thing to jam. I mean, and sometimes you have to be careful because moisture meters are not, they're a little delicate, but you know, just jamming a screwdriver into the ground and looking, for a lot of people that doesn't help them, but a really inexpensive moisture meter can really go a long way. And so that even could be something to link into education and incentives as well, because it's a little gadget that's actually useful that could be, you know, maybe something that might be worth having available for people.
Yeah, there was actually a presentation at the last Utah Water Conservation Forum meeting, which was the next one is Thursday and the last one was last week, from I don't remember which company it was, but they actually have a hub hub that goes out, that's a weather hub that goes out to all of the smart timers that you install, and they're all hooked up to the same kind of system. And then you can actually water based on like real-time weather conditions and moisture meters and connect everything up. So there's lots of options in the smart timer and technology, watering technology realm that I think would be really great to explore, at least via education and incentives, if not being able to actually, help people get them.
Well, and even just really simple low tech, being able to shove a thing in the ground and see it yourself, I think, because it can get pretty pricey if you're going to get a smart controller that actually also has moisture, water probes, because that's pretty pricey compared to one that's, looking at weather data. And honestly, our soil moisture is almost more important than our weather data sometimes, because we can have a storm, and if it's, particularly windy or very short-lived, okay, fine, we got some moisture, but it doesn't actually get into the ground. So
I'm going to ask a question at this point in time. When we're talking, I'm going to take a step back. Sorry, I'm going to digress, you guys. Levi and Chuck, we talked about the city being one of the top 10 users of water, and I'm pretty sure it's the institutional part of what we're doing in terms of we do have parks that we take care of, and we need those parks. I'm not saying we don't. What she's talking about, I thought that you guys already had some water smart systems going on, and your parks people were paying close attention to whether or not they actually needed to water or not, and had some automation on it, including, I think, some phone stuff. I thought you already had that going on with your people that are in charge of your watering. But is this concept that Mila's discussing something the city might want to consider to bring their water use down? And would that be significant in terms of the whole total amount of water that the area that the city of Moab uses? And that could be something we could put that in our conservation. We don't have to do it tomorrow. We can do it in the next 5 years. Levi, Chuck, do you guys want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so all of the parks are on automated sprinkler systems, and they are scheduled to water at night. We have a couple personnel that are in charge of monitoring the watering schedule and pay pretty close attention to that. We are actively looking into better watering practices above that, cutting back on times, and even going every 3 days versus every other day. So scenarios like that. But we are actively looking at trying to cut back our current usage.
Would this smart watering system where we do have moisture sensors in some of our parks be something you guys might consider at some point in time?
I think it could be beneficial in areas that we could closely monitor, that wouldn't get vandalized or misplaced, right. I guess. So
maybe we ought to put that in one of our conservation goals for the next 5 years to make the city's landscaping or watering more smart oriented. What do you guys think of that?
I think that's a great idea, but I also think we don't have to rely on technology for that. I think that in some ways, you can do that with a more simple moisture meter and have someone on staff who's paying attention and experimenting with things, maybe. Because one thing I can think of, for instance, is in a spot like Swanee City Park around the Moab Recreation Center, that lawn is so big that unless you're going to have, and it's used, I mean, it's used in a lot of different ways. So I'm not saying we get rid of that, but if you try to actually water it with water meters or moisture meters in there, they would be very localized, whereas someone could go around after different waterings and kind of gauge, maybe once a month they're checking that soil moisture to see what it really needs to be. Because I think, there is some appeal to this whole idea of, I'll do it, with technology. But I think also there's a lot to be said for just having some good trained staff that can monitor some things the old fashioned way.
So with that in mind, that sounds like Sounds great. Maybe we put in the conservation for the next 5 years to be for the city to investigate opportunities to use not necessarily smart, but more sophisticated methods to determine how much water the actual parks need and ways we could cut back on that. That sounds like something we ought to throw out there. No, if the city's not willing to do it, we shouldn't say we're going to do it. But if they're willing to look at that, that sounds great to me. We ought to put that in one of our things we're going to do in the next 5 years.
I think that's reasonable, Arnie.
Yeah, and our new parks director is going to be starting here in I think in June. So we can talk to her about that as well when she's on board.
You know, Leva, what amazes me is years ago back in Boulder, I was running a park, okay, across the street from a residential development. And I remember just had 3/4 inch lines in it, which wasn't enough. And so the sprinklers wouldn't spread water out far enough. So in the middle of the hot summer, you'd see some areas of the lawn that were nice and green and others that were brown because they just simply weren't getting watered. So I don't know who set up your parks, but it's amazing how uniformly green they are, which I take to mean either somebody did a great job of, designing the sprinklers and pressures and so forth to essentially uniformly sprinkle the parks, or you're overwatering the daylights out of them. Hopefully the former, okay? But I remember it's not easy to do. I mean, because this kind of gets into the smart system versus manual system. Because I remember I would go out and see certain areas that were dry every summer and, run just one zone wherever it was brown and try to keep the grass green that way rather than re-watering the entire area.
There will be some of that, I think, if water is trying to be restricted. But I think at this point, from what I've noticed, there's an awful lot of watering daily or every other day, which maybe it'll take a minute to adjust, which that's all right.
Yeah. And Mila, your comment about no puddles and so forth reminds me of, I'm part owner of my mother and grandmother's dryland cotton farm down in Central Texas, dryland, yeah. And so the guy that farms it for us down there every year, that's his big thing. He terraces and daylights out of this 300 or 400 acre parcel just to make sure nothing runs off. Okay, so that's the whole key to getting a cotton crop out of it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't want the water to just go down the drain. No point. So then I think that the question for you all is, do any of these things on here seem like policies that you would be interested in, researching or suggesting, including in the plan, or, actually pursuing, versus a lot of this outreach and education that we are talking about doing already. So, I think we'll definitely be talking, when we talk with Lisa this week, we'll talk about how much we want to put in there about turf grass, obviously the puddling issues, just efficiency in general, lots of suggestions for those kinds of things. Some of the more policy-based landscape rules would be, things like a turf grass buyback or rebate that some places have done, where you can either get cash or, just like a rebate on your water bill. And I think that would depend on, potentially how much we think that residential turf grass is actually, how much of an effect that's actually having on our watering. I know that, the city has the most, and, our turf grass, I think in a lot of the parks is very well used, as you guys have said. So, that's something that that other municipalities have done, is an actual buyback program. I think, other than that, we've talked a little bit about watering rules and restrictions. So other than that, I think we're mostly going to be discussing rules for new development, is from what I'm kind of gathering. It doesn't sound like there's anything else we're talking about as far as people's current practices other than this kind of education. So then unless that's wrong, is there anything that anyone would be interested in pursuing for currently established landscape?
I think I'm curious. It's item 5, planning would really, in all capitals, like a species list and BMPs for planting. Is that intended for new or existing or both?
I think that would be for both. I think, mostly for new is when a lot of people contact the planning department, but I think both would be very helpful.
And that's certainly something that I have a fair bit of experience with and would certainly be more than happy to help with. Also just some good information on what actually works here, because it's one thing to get online and, or talk to someone who hasn't worked on this stuff for many years, but, USU and others honestly don't always have the right species for our area, because it is a little different here. So you can put me down to help with that if that's helpful.
Yeah. And so that's
help with that if it's more helpful that way.
That's exactly the kind of distinction that that I'm trying to make, is that I think for now, for current development, that would be extremely helpful as an educational tool, versus for new development, we could potentially pursue having that be a requirement.
And I think that's a great way to go about it, and then maybe couple some things with something like the flip the strip or cash for grass, so that it could encourage people to reduce their lawns, because there was a push to do that many years ago on a lot of yards, but also making sure that's coupled with stuff that helps people understand how to keep their trees and other things alive. Because you pull that lawn out, and if your trees have been relying on that water, you could end up killing all your trees and not even know it until they're dead. So there's some nuance to that I think is pretty important.
Camille, a quick question for you, just to be clear. The landscape ordinances, they explicitly state that they only apply to new development, and old existing development is not impacted by them at all. Is that much right?
That's an option. So we are discussing whether or not there are if there are rules or restrictions that we would want to place on current development, versus kind of focusing on the education and outreach component for current development, and then developing an actual landscape ordinance with requirements for new development.
Okay, that's what I thought. I mean, the only possible extension to that, I guess, is the same rules that we use for expansion of businesses, for example, or houses for that matter. When a property, if you've got a property, for example, that's legally conforming in some respect, and you could argue that residences that are operating under old landscaping rules, in one sense, are now legally non-conforming in the sense that they don't conform to, say, xeriscape requirements, for example. And then if you said that, then if a new owner or an existing owner would wish to, say, add an addition onto his house, or a business wanted to add a new building out back kind of thing, you would impose the new landscaping requirements on them at that time. That would be one way to work it, I guess. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that would certainly be, that would be one way. I think that could be a little complicated, because I think some people would probably have pretty non-conforming yards that might really need to change if you just made them do everything with an addition. I think, we can talk with the planning department and the city council and see what they might want to do in that regard. I think, another option is really to kind of put a timestamp on it. Anything before 2021, anything after 2021 anything new has to be conforming. The new section has to be conforming. I think there are a few different ways that we could go about that.
Yeah, I can see it creates a conflict, all right? If you got somebody right next door who just moved in and they've got to have a xeriscape lawn, and somebody else right next door to them, like me, for example, I'm sitting here staring at an acre of grass out in front of me. They're going to be unhappy. Well, how come you don't have to play by the same rules we do? See what I'm driving at?
Yeah, change is hard. That's always true, though.
And I think, that's the other piece, where if all we have are new requirements and no education and outreach, I think a big part that's going to make the landscaping aspect actually function to truly change water use patterns is going to be making it not just a stick, but also a carrot of reducing your water bill, and also educating or letting inspiring people to understand it's not that you're going to have to weed your cheatgrass and your this is and that's all the time. There's ways to do this in a way that actually in the long run is less maintenance as well. So I think there's a whole thing that really can make it work. It's just you can't do one without the other. You have to have that outreach component, I think.
And I think one other thing just to think about is the potential of people, like you're saying, Mike, as far as, it being unfair, people that have fruit trees or want to grow food, that's a really important thing to, I think, try to provide an option for, rather than just, no, only xeriscaping and no, gardening or food production, for instance.
Maybe I can bribe all you guys with being cherry trees. I got a couple big ones,
And good xeriscape doesn't exclude food production. I mean, that's the other thing. I think xeriscape has a zero concept that people have in their minds of it. So I think that's really important.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Arnie?
Yeah, just quickly, I like the idea that we're separating it out new from current development and what's already out there. It is really tough for people to retrofit, and that's the same problem with gray water. Tearing up your sprinkler system, dividing it into different zones is very expensive. I don't think that's fair to property owners that have already got a house at this point in time. It is very fair to give them a carrot. And I like the carrot approach when we're dealing with the current practices, and I like the stick approach when we're dealing with the new stuff. Other cities you have to return in a landscaping plan with your planning documents, and those are reviewed, and the city tells you yes or no, and asks you to do certain things with it. And I don't think that's out of line for an area where we live in the desert and our water supply is limited. So I have no problems with a stick for any new development. And it needs to be reasonable, and they do need especially residential, they need the opportunity to have a garden and things like that, and then it needs to look nice. But there can be easily put restrictions in that will make it look nice and be feasible to have a nice piece of property. So my 2 cents on that.
Does anyone else have any other comments on this document as it stands right now? Otherwise, maybe let's move on shortly to future agenda items so that we are prepared for the next meeting.
I have one other question. Do you want comments on this from us?
No, this was perfect. I think we have a good direction. I think staff is going to work on, the education and outreach component of this, and then we'll start pulling together some ideas for the future, for new development as a landscape ordinance, and we'll get to work on that.
I do have some specific comments on this document. I might like to say a few things about it to the city in terms of just my opinion. Maybe I'll send that to you, but anyways.
Sure.
Okay.
And I just wanted to make sure, it seems like what we've talked about, this is talking specifically to the document in front of me. This idea of Park City watering uses even odd street addresses for even odd days. Sounds like from what you were talking about, that's not a direction, because I would echo what you had said about that. And even with the nighttime, maybe making sure some of that kind of clarity is put in here. And then as far as the turf grass BMPs, I think that's pretty good. And it's just a matter of, making sure, I guess the question I have is, how detailed do you want this, or does this want to be in this plan versus in an actual ordinance? Because for instance, apply between 1/2 and 1 inch of water each irrigation. You say that to most people and they look blindly at you like, how do I know that? So I think if things like that are going to be in in an actual land use code, there needs to be then an example of how to measure that and how to understand what you're doing. So, because otherwise I think it just leaves people going, I can't do this. So that's just, you know, those, I don't need to give you anything more detailed than that, but I'm happy with this landscape thing to, you know, if you have specific questions, feel free to let me know.
Great, thank you. And I think just to speak to that for a second, I think what I would envision is there being not that much detail in the water conservation plan update specifically. And then more of, but you know, all of the concepts that we've been talking about, and then the detail would be contained in both the, you know, education and outreach, and then also in whatever landscape ordinance we do develop. So yes, I definitely agree. 1/2 inch to 1 inch of water is a very difficult thing to conceptualize. So that's just, you know, that's mostly notes and things that, you know, are more for us. And then we'll be, you know, turning them into something that people can actually use, ideally.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll leave that item where it stands for now. Does anyone have any future agenda items for June? Yeah, Steve.
So I sent out a letter this morning to the members and also to Carly. As you're aware, the Division of Water Rights is going through their adjudication process. And sometime this fall, they will publish their results. At that point, you'll have 90 days to make comments on their results. And I think that the city and counties should get ready for that. One thing that I found when I looked at the 2019 results was there are people that have a well right that includes household use, but since they a lot of them are now on the municipal water, they should have that 1 acre feet per year for municipal or for household use removed from their water right. And I checked one of my relatives, they got a letter that stated that they were still allowed this 1 acre foot, but they are on the Grand Valley water system. So that's just one thing that we probably want to make comments to the state at. And I don't know if this committee is the proper place to do it, or if it's something that staff will want to do, or the council. But that's one thing that we should at least think about.
Is that something you would like to bring up as an agenda item at a future meeting to further discuss, or what is your thought there, Steve?
Well, if we think that this is a proper thing for the committee to handle, I think that we should have it on the agenda. You could start with what I wrote, sent out. And if you want more details, I would be glad to do the research and write up some talking points for us to discuss. But yes, having it on the agenda would be a good thing.
As far as the city goes, I don't think there are many people in that situation, probably in Spanish Valley. There are.
Yeah,
Kyle, what happened? Go ahead. Kyle, what happened with you when Mark came by and adjudicated your 2 wells?
He said, I had a very nice yard. And did I want to combine the wells? And I said, no.
Did you cut your water back?
Nope.
He didn't cut yours back. You know, we cut a lot of people back already. That was part of his plan, was to cut a lot. And a lot of people were unhappy about it. But to Steve's point, 1 acre foot for a household in this area is quite a lot when we're really only using about 0.54, if I read his document correctly. But it might be a little late to comment on that.
He was talking about municipal use.
Right.
People that had switched to municipal use from domestic use. And I just don't think it's, there are too many people in the city that have done that. It'd be out in Spanish Valley.
And that they're using our water. So maybe it is appropriate when this adjudication process comes out. I'm not sure that what Steve's talking about is something that we could actually comment on, but we should research it anyways.
It sounds to me this might not be as pertinent to this group right now, as is the water conservation plan. So either we put it on a future agenda, or we bring it to the MOP, or we take it somewhere where that level of discussion is already happening, or maybe bring it up. If you want to do some more research, Steve, bring it up as part of your board report next time, and we can have a discussion at that point, if you want to provide an update to what you've been looking into.
I think the other thing that Steve talked about was the state allowing wells and not closing up the aquifer. And Mark Stilson spoke about that at the county council meeting, that after they got through this adjudication, that they would consider shutting off the aquifer.
So, closing it, yes.
So even after the aquifer is closed, water rights are private property and can be sold. So if a person could sell paper water to someone and then they drill a new well, we would be increasing the amount of water withdrawn from hopefully a balanced system. So that's the long-term implications.
Okay, great. Let's leave it there for now, since we're down to our last minute, and carry on the discussion when we carry on next. Does anyone have any other agenda items? If not, then we'll have a discussion between now and then. Look at what we're going to talk about next time. Okay, we'll leave it there. All right, if there's nothing else, we will adjourn this meeting at 5 p.m., which it is right now.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.